Proof of heaven. I'm going to read it to you. I'm doing it on video just because I think that maybe people need to hear this. Prologue. A man should look for what is and not for what he thinks should be. Albert Einstein. When I was a kid, I would often dream of flying. Most of the time, I'd be standing out in my yard at night looking up at the stars, when out of the blue, I'd start floating upward. The first few inches happened automatically, but soon I'd notice that the higher I got, the more my progress depended on me, on what I did. If I got too excited, too swept away by the experience, I would plummet back to the ground hard. But if I played it cool, took it all in stride, then off I would go, faster and faster, up into the starry sky. Maybe those dreams were part of the reason why, as I got older, I fell in love with airplanes and rockets, with anything that might get me back up there in the world above this one. When our family flew, my face was pressed flat to the plane's window from takeoff to landing. In the summer of 1968, when I was 14, I spent all the money I'd earned mowing lawns on a set of sailplane lessons with a guy named Gus Street at Strawberry Hill, a little grass strip airport just west off of West Salem, North Carolina, the town where I grew up. I still remember the feeling of my heart pounding as I pulled the big cherry red knob that unhooked the rope connecting me to the tow plane and banked my sailplane toward the field. It was my first time I had ever felt truly alone and free. Most of my friends got that feeling in cars, but for the money, being 1,000 feet up in a sailplane beat that thrill 100 times over. But for my money, being 1,000 feet up in a sailplane beat that thrill 100 times over. Okay, I didn't understand that. But in college in the 1970s, I joined the University of North Carolina sport parachuting or skydiving team. It felt like something special and magical. My first jump was terrifying, and the second even more so. But by my 12th jump, when I stepped out the door and had to fall for more than 1,000 feet before opening my parachute, my first 10-second delay, I knew I was home. I made 365 parachute jumps in college and logged more than 3.5 hours in free fall, mainly in formations with up to 25 fellow jumpers. Although I stopped jumping in 1976, I continue to enjoy vivid dreams about skydiving, which were always pleasant. The best jumps were often late in the afternoon when the sun was starting to sink beneath the horizon. It's hard to describe the feeling I would get on those jumps, a feeling of getting close to something that I could never quite name, but I knew I had to have more of. It wasn't solitude exactly, because the way we dived actually wasn't all that solitary. We jumped 5, 6, sometimes 10 or 12 people at a time, building free fall formations. The bigger and the more challenging, the better. One beautiful autumn Saturday in 1975, the rest of us UNC jumpers and I teamed up with some of our friends at a para center in eastern North Carolina for some formations. On our penultimate jump of the day, out of a D-18 Beechcraft at 10,500 feet, we made a 10-man snowflake. We managed to get ourselves into a complete formation before we passed 7,000 feet, and thus were able to enjoy a full 18 seconds of flying the formation down a clear chasm between the two towering cumulus clouds before breaking apart at 3,500 feet and tracking away from each other to open our chutes. By the time we hit the ground, the sun was down. But by hustling into another plane and taking off again quickly, we managed to get back into the last of sun's rays and do a second sunset jump. For this one, 2 junior members were getting their first shot at flying into the formation, that is, joining it from the outside rather than being the base or pin man, which is easier because your job is essentially to fall straight down while everyone else maneuvers toward you. It was exciting for the 2 junior members, but also for those of us who were more seasoned, because we were building the team, adding to the experience of jumpers who'd later be capable of joining us for even bigger formations. I was to be the last man out in a 6-man star attempt above the runways of a small airport just outside Roanoke Rapids, North Carolina. The guy directly in front of me was named Chuck. Chuck was fairly experienced at relative work, or RW, that is, building free fall formations. We were still in sunshine at 7,500 feet, but a mile and a half below us, the streetlights were blinking on. Twilight jumps were always sublime, and this was clearly going to be a beautiful one. Even though I'd be exciting, the plane a mere second or so behind Chuck, I'd have to move fast to catch up with everyone. I'd rocket straight down headfirst for the first 7 seconds or so. This would make me drop almost 100 miles per hour faster than my friends so that I could be right there with them after they had built the initial formation. Normal procedure for our W jumps was for all jumpers to break apart 3,500 feet and track away from the formation for maximum separation. Each would then wave off with his arms signaling imminent deployment of his parachute to turn, look above to make sure no others were above him, then pull the ripcord. 3, 2, 1, go. The first 4 jumpers excited, and Chuck and I followed close behind. Upside down in a full head dive and approaching terminal velocity, I smiled as I saw the sun setting for the second time that day. After streaking down to the others, my plan was to slam on the air brakes by throwing out my arms. We had fabric wings from wrists to hips that gave tremendous resistance when fully inflated at high speed, and aiming my jumpsuit, bell-bottom sleeves, and pants straight into the oncoming air. But I never had the chance. Plummeting toward the formation, I saw that one of the new guys had come in too fast, maybe falling rapidly between nearby clouds, and had him a little spooked. I reminded him that he was moving about 200 feet per second toward the giant planet below, partially shrouded in gathering darkness. Rather than slowly joining the edge of the formation, he barreled in and knocked everybody loose. Now all 5 other jumpers were tumbling out of control. They were also much too close together. A skydiver leaves a super turbulent stream of low-pressure air behind him. If a jumper gets into that trail, he instantly speeds up and can crash into that person below him. That in turn can make both jumpers accelerate, slam into anyone who might be below them. In short, it's a recipe for disaster. I angled my body and tracked away from the group to avoid the tumbling mess. I maneuvered until I was falling right over the spot, a magical point on the ground above which we were to open our parachutes for the leisurely 2-minute descent. I looked over and was relieved to see that the disoriented jumpers were now also tracking away from each other, dispersing the deadly clump. Chuck was there among them. To my surprise, he was coming straight in my direction. He stopped directly beneath me, with all the groups tumbling. We were passing through 2,000 feet elevation more quickly than Chuck had anticipated. Maybe he thought he was lucky and didn't have to follow the rules exactly. He must not see me. The thought barely had time to go through my head before Chuck's colorful pilot chute blossomed out of his backpack. His pilot chute caught the 120-mile breeze around him and shot straight towards me, pulling his main parachute and its sleeve right behind it. The instant I saw Chuck's pilot chute emerge, I had a fraction of a second to react, for it would take less than a second to tumble through his deploying main parachute and quite likely right into Chuck himself. At that speed, if I hit his arm or leg, I would take it right off, dealing myself a fatal blow in the process. If I hit him directly, both our bodies would essentially explode. People say that move more slowly in situations like this, and they're right. My mind watched the action in the microseconds that followed as if we were watching a movie in slow motion. The instant I saw the pilot chute, my arms flew to my sides and I straightened my body into a head dive. Bending ever so slightly at the hips, the verticality gave me increased speed, and the bend allowed my body to add first a little, then a blast horizontal motion as my body became an efficient wing, sending me zipping past Chuck in front of his colorful blossoming commander's parachute. I passed him going at over 150 miles per hour, over 220 feet per second. Given that speed, I doubt he saw the expression on my face. But if he had, he would have seen a look of sheer astonishment. Somehow I had reacted in microseconds to a situation that I actually had time to think about would have been much too complex for me to deal with. And yet, I had dealt with it, and we both landed safely. It was as if, presented with a situation that required more than its usual ability to respond, my brain had become for a moment superpowered. How had I done it? Over the course of my 20-plus year career in academic neurosurgery, of studying the brain, observing how it works, and operating on it, I've had plenty of opportunities to ponder this very question. I finally chalked it up to the fact that the brain is a truly extraordinary device, more extraordinary than we can even guess. I realize now that the real answer to the question is much more profound, but I had to go through a complete metamorphosis of my life and worldview to glimpse that answer. This book is about the events that changed my mind on the matter. They convinced me that, as marvelous a mechanism as the brain is, it was not my brain that saved my life that day at all. What sprang into action the second Chuck's chute started to open was another, much deeper part of me, a part that could move so fast because it was not stuck in time at all, the way the brain and the body are. This was the same part of me, in fact, that had made me so homesick for the skies as a kid. It's not only the smartest part of us, but the deepest part of us as well. For most of my adult life, I was unable to believe in it. But I do believe now, and the pages that follow will tell you why. I'm a neurosurgeon. I graduated from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill in 1976 with a major in chemistry and earned my MD at Duke University Medical School in 1980. During my 11 years of medical school and residency training at Duke as well as Massachusetts General Hospital and Harvard, I focused on neuroendocrinology, the study of interactions between the nervous system and endocrine system. A series of glands that release the hormones that direct most of your body's activities. I also spent 2 of those 11 years investigating how blood vessels in one area of your brain react pathologically when there is no bleeding into it from an aneurysm, a syndrome known as cerebral vasospasm. After completing a fellowship in cerebrovascular neurosurgery in Newcastle upon Tyne in the United Kingdom, I spent 15 years on the faculty of Harvard Medical School as an associate professor of surgery with a specialization in neurosurgery. During those years, I operated on the countless patients, many of them with severe life-threatening brain conditions. Most of my research work involved the development of advanced technical procedures like stereotactic radiosurgery, a technique that allows surgeons to precisely guide the beams of radiation to specific targets deep in the brain without affecting adjacent areas. I also helped develop magnetic resonance image-guided neurosurgical procedures instrumental in repairing hard-to-treat brain conditions like tumors and vascular disorders. During those years, I also authored or co-authored more than 150 chapters and papers for peer-reviewed medical journals and presented my findings at more than 200 medical conferences around the world. In short, I devoted myself to science, using the tools of modern medicine to help and heal people. And to learn more about the workings of the human body and brain was my life's calling. I felt immeasurably lucky to have found it. More important, I had a beautiful wife and 2 lovely children, and while I was in many ways married to my work, I did not neglect my family, which I considered the other great blessing in my life. On many accounts, I was a very lucky man, and I knew it. On November 10th, 2008, however, at age 54, my luck seemed to run out. I was struck by a rare illness and thrown into a coma for 7 days. During that time, my entire neocortex, the outer surface of the brain, the part that makes us human, was shut down, inoperative, in essence, absent. When your brain is absent, you're absent too. As a neurosurgeon, I'd heard many stories over the years of people who had strange experiences, usually after suffering cardiac arrest. Stories of traveling to mysterious, wonderful landscapes, of talking to dead relatives, even of meeting God himself. Wonderful stuff, no question, but all of it, in my opinion, was pure fantasy. What caused the otherworldly types of experience that such people so often report? I didn't claim to know, but I did know they were brain-based. All of consciousness is. If you don't have a working brain, you can't be conscious. This is because the brain is the machine that produces consciousness in the first place. The machine breaks down consciousness. When the machine breaks down, consciousness stops. As vastly complicated and mysterious as the actual mechanics of the brain processes are, in the essence, the matter is as simple as that. Pull the plug and the TV goes dead. The show is over no matter how much you might have been enjoying it. Or so I would have told you before my own brain crashed. During my coma, my brain wasn't working improperly. It wasn't working at all. I now believe that this might have been what was responsible for the depth and intensity of the near-death experience that I myself underwent during it. Many of the NDEs reported happened when a person's heart was shut down for a while. In those cases, the neocortex is temporarily inactivated, but generally not too damaged, provided the flow of oxygenated blood is restored through cardiopulmonary resuscitation. That's my band name, or reactivation of cardiac function within 4 minutes or so. But in my case, the neocortex was out of the picture. I was encountering the reality of a world of consciousness that existed completely free of the limitations of my physical brain. Mine was in some ways a perfect storm of near-death experiences. As a practicing neurosurgeon with decades of research and hands-on work in the operating room behind me, I was in a better than average position to judge not only the reality, but also the implications of what happened to me. Those implications are tremendous, beyond description. My experience showed me that death of the body and the brain are not the end of consciousness. That human experience continues beyond the grave. More important, it continues under the gaze of God, who loves and cares about each one of us and about the universe itself and all beings within it are ultimately going. The place I went was real in a way that makes the life we're living here and now completely dreamlike by comparison. This doesn't mean I don't value life I'm living now, however. In fact, I value it more than I ever did before. I do so because now I see it in its true context. This life isn't meaningless, but we can't see that fact from here, at least most of the time. What happened to me while I was in the coma is hands down the most important story I'll ever tell. But it's a tricky story to tell because it's so foreign to ordinary understanding. I can't simply shout it out from the rooftops. At the same time, my conclusions are based on medical analysis of my experience and on my familiarity with the most advanced concepts in brain science and consciousness studies. Once I realized the truth behind my journey, I knew I had to tell it. Doing so properly has become the chief task of my life. That's not to say I've abandoned my medical work and my life as a neurosurgeon, but now that I've been privileged to understand that our life does not end with the death of the body or the brain, I see it as my duty, my calling to tell people about what I saw beyond the body and beyond this earth. I'm especially eager to tell my story to the people who might have heard stories similar to mine before I wanted to believe them, but had not been able to fully do so. It is to these people more than any other that I direct this book and the message within it. What I have to tell you is as important as anything anyone will ever tell you, and it's true. Okay. So, proof of heaven. That's a neurosurgeon. God is love. And the gospel is good news. I think that the ideology that we are in some sort of soul processing area wouldn't be the weirdest idea. If you wanted to be with your creation, but they had been tainted by sin, wouldn't you want to teach them before you allowed them to come to eternity? And then wouldn't the absence of hatred be so amazing that eternity would actually be worth living? These philosophical questions and important NDEs are things that aren't known around the world wide. And I believe in the Bible it says, once Jesus has been preached to every man and every woman, the time has come. I'm not one of those brimstone preachers. I'm not one of those guys that, thinks that you're a bad person because you believe in, like, some people, let me just start this. Some people are grown up in good families. Some people have good morality. Some people are taught the 10 Commandments and not to break them. And some people actually adhere to that on an outward profession very well. But sin is in the intent of the heart. We all know that. So in the intent of the heart, nobody's innocent. And that's the point, is that even the hardest trying human being will still be imperfect to God. And well, it sounds harsh. It's not. It's not, because if God is perfect love, you're not. I mean, I'll tell you right now, I've never met a woman who could perfectly love me. And I understand why, it makes perfect sense to me. I used to be really bad into fucking addictive problems. And not only that, but I'm proud of myself for the inmate firefighting I did. Not everybody likes you to be proud of the time you served in prison. And to that, I say, fuck off and die. Sorry, Lord. That was a little much. But to that, I say, yeah. gosh. I get a little emotional sometimes. My bad. I should probably stop. That was the prologue to Proof of Heaven. I'll read another chapter tomorrow and, yeah, make it a daily thing.